Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! Connor and Eloise strolled hand in hand down the sidewalk. Their elegant attire stood out among the casual passers-by, drawing admiring glances from those they passed. Connor's tailored tuxedo fit him like a glove, the crisp white shirt a stark contrast against the deep black of his jacket. Eloise's gown shimmered with every step, the deep blue fabric hugging her curves before flowing gracefully to the ground. "I can't believe we're finally going to the gala!" Eloise gushed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We've been looking forward to this for months!" Connor squeezed her hand gently, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's going to be a night to remember, that's for sure. Though I have to admit, I'm a little nervous about all the schmoozing we'll have to do." "Oh, come on!" Eloise teased, nudging him playfully with her shoulder. "You're great at charming people. Just flash that winning smile of yours, and they'll be eating out of your hand in no time." As they rounded the corner, a peculiar storefront caught their attention. Nestled between a trendy coffee shop and a high-end boutique was a whimsical little shop with a sign that read, "Madame Zara's Costume Emporium, where fantasy meets reality." The window display was a riot of color and texture, featuring everything from elegant period costumes to outrageous over-the-top ensembles that looked like they belonged in an avant-garde fashion show. Mannequins posed in dramatic tableaus, each telling a different story through their attire. Eloise slowed her pace, her gaze drawn to the eclectic mix of clothing and accessories. "Connor, look at this place! Isn't it amazing?" Connor followed her gaze, his eyebrows rising in surprise.
"Well, that's certainly different. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it before."
A mischievous glint appeared in Eloise's eyes as she turned to face her boyfriend.
"You know, we still have some time before the gala starts. What do you say we check it out?"
Connor hesitated, glancing down at his watch. "I don't know, Elle. We don't want to be late." "Oh, come on, live a little," Eloise pleaded, tugging gently on his arm. "We'll just take a quick peek. Who knows? We might find something fun to spice up our outfits." Unable to resist her enthusiasm, Connor relented with a chuckle. All right, but just for a few minutes, okay?" As they pushed open the door, a tiny bell tinkled overhead, announcing their arrival. The interior of the shop was even more chaotic and colorful than the window display had suggested. Racks of clothing lined the walls and created narrow aisles throughout the space, each one overflowing with costumes and accessories from every era and imagination. The air was thick with the scent of incense and old fabric, creating an atmosphere that was both mysterious and inviting. Soft, ethereal music played in the background, adding to the otherworldly feel of the place.
"Welcome, darlings!"
A voice called out from somewhere within the depths of the shop. A moment later, a woman emerged from behind a rack of sequined flapper dresses. She was tall and willowy, with wild silver hair that seemed to defy gravity and piercing green eyes that sparkled with mischief. She was dressed in an eclectic mix of patterns and textures that somehow worked together, creating an ensemble that was both bizarre and strangely elegant. "I'm Madame Zara, proprietress of this humble establishment. What brings you to my little corner of magic this fine evening?" Eloise, still captivated by the array of costumes surrounding them, answered without taking her eyes off a particularly stunning peacock-inspired headdress. "We were just passing by and couldn't resist taking a look. Your shop is incredible!" Madame Zara's face lit up with a wide smile. "Why, thank you, my dear. I do pride myself on curating a collection that can transport anyone to any time or place they desire." Her gaze swept over Connor and Eloise, taking in their formal attire. "But it seems you two are already dressed for an adventure of your own. A special occasion, perhaps?" Connor nodded, unconsciously straightening his bow tie.
We're on our way to a charity gala. It's a pretty big deal in our social circle.
Yes,
Madame Zara mused, tapping a long, bejeweled finger against her chin.
The annual Starlight Foundation Gala, I presume. It's quite the event.
Eloise's eyes widened in surprise.
You know about it? Madame Zara let out a musical laugh. My dear, in my line of work, it pays to keep abreast of all the social events in the city. After all, you never know when someone might need a last-minute costume for a themed party or a touch of whimsy for a formal affair.
As she spoke, her eyes darted between Connor and Eloise, a sly smile playing at the corners of her mouth.
You know,
she said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone,
if you really want to make an impression at the gala, I might have just the thing.
Connor and Eloise exchanged curious glances.
What did you have in mind?
Connor asked, his initial reluctance giving way to intrigue. Madame Zara's eyes twinkled with mischief.
Well, you two make such a handsome couple, but imagine the stir you'd cause if you swapped roles for the evening?
Eloise's jaw dropped.
You mean...
Precisely, my dear. Madame Zara nodded, clearly warming to her idea.
Connor, in a glamorous gown, and you in his dashing tuxedo. It would be the talk of the gala.
Connor's eyes widened, a mix of shock and amusement on his face.
Wait, you want me to wear a dress? To the gala?
Eloise, however, was already grinning from ear to ear.
Oh my God, Connor, that would be amazing! Can you imagine the looks on everyone's faces? But what about our outfits?
Connor sputtered, gesturing to their carefully chosen ensembles.
We spent weeks picking these out.
Madame Zara waved her hand dismissively.
Details, darling. Details. I assure you, I can provide you with alternatives that will make your original choices pale in comparison.
She fixed Connor with a penetrating gaze. Unless, of course, you're not up for a little adventure? Connor looked from Madame Zara's challenging smirk to Eloise's pleading eyes, feeling his resolve crumble.
I guess it could be fun,
he admitted, a nervous laugh escaping him. But are you sure we can pull this off?
My dear boy,
Madame Zara said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. In my shop, anything is possible. Now, let's get to work, shall we? We have a gala to prepare for. With a clap of her hands, Madame Zara set to work, pulling gowns and tuxedos from seemingly thin air. She ushered Connor and Eloise into separate changing areas, tossing garments over the curtains with practiced ease.
Try these on for size, dears, she called out. And don't be shy. The key to pulling off any look is confidence.
In the privacy of his changing area, Connor stared at the array of gowns before him, feeling a mix of trepidation and excitement. He picked up a sleek emerald green number with a plunging neckline and shimmering beadwork. Here goes nothing, he muttered to himself, stepping into the dress. Meanwhile, Eloise was having the time of her life, trying on different tuxedos and suit combinations. She settled on a classic black tux with satin lapels, marveling at how different she looked in the mirror.
How's it going in there?
She called out to Connor, barely containing her excitement.
I think I need some help,
came Connor's muffled reply. Madame Zara swooped in, disappearing behind Connor's curtain. There was a brief rustling, followed by a gasp from the shopkeeper.
Oh, darling,
Madame Zara breathed.
You look absolutely stunning.
A moment later, Connor emerged from behind the curtain, and Eloise's jaw dropped. The emerald gown hugged his body in all the right places, the beadwork catching the light with every movement. Despite his initial awkwardness, there was something undeniably elegant about the way he carried himself.
Connor,
Eloise whispered.
You look amazing!
A blush crept up Connor's cheeks, but he couldn't help the smile that spread across his face.
You really think so? It feels strange, but kind of exciting too. Madame Zara clapped her hands together in delight. What did I tell you? You were born to wear that gown, darling. Now, let's see how our other half is faring. Eloise stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of her tuxedo jacket. The tailored suit accentuated her figure in a completely different way than her usual dresses, giving her an air of confident sophistication. Connor's eyes widened as he took in the sight of his girlfriend in his would-be outfit. Wow, Elle, you look incredible. Madame Zara circled the couple, making small adjustments here and there. A few accessories, some creative makeup, and you'll be the belles of the ball. Or should I say, the belle and the beau? Over the next hour, Madame Zara worked her magic. She fitted Connor with a pair of elegant heels, teaching him how to walk with grace and poise. For Eloise, she produced a pair of Oxford shoes that fit perfectly, along with a selection of cufflinks and a pocket square to complete the look. Makeup was next on the agenda. Madame Zara applied a subtle but glamorous look to Connor's face, accentuating his features without going overboard. For Eloise, she opted for a more masculine contouring technique, giving her face a chiseled appearance. As a finishing touch, Madame Zara presented Connor with a long, wavy wig in a shade that perfectly matched his natural hair color. Once styled, it transformed his appearance completely. There, Madame Zara said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Now that's what I call a transformation. Connor and Eloise stood side by side, staring at their reflections in a full-length mirror. The change was remarkable. Connor looked every bit the glamorous socialite, while Eloise exuded the charm of a dashing gentleman. I can't believe it, Connor murmured, turning this way and that to examine his new look. I actually feel beautiful. Eloise slipped her arm around his waist, grinning up at him. You are beautiful and incredibly brave for going along with this crazy idea. Madame Zara watched them with a satisfied smile. Now, my dears, before you go, we must discuss your personas for the evening. After all, half the fun of a costume is becoming someone else for a while. Connor raised an eyebrow. Personas? You mean we should pretend to be different people? Exactly, Madame Zara exclaimed. It's not enough to look the part, you must become the part. For tonight, you're not Connor and Eloise. Let's see. She tapped her chin thoughtfully before snapping her fingers. You're Charlotte and Ethan, distant cousins of the host, visiting from Europe. Eloise's eyes lit up with excitement. Oh, I love it! We can make up all sorts of stories about our fabulous lives abroad. Connor, or rather Charlotte for the evening, found himself getting caught up in the excitement. I suppose I could be a famous fashion designer, known for my avant-garde creations. And I, Eloise, now Ethan, declared in a deepened voice, could be a renowned art dealer, always on the hunt for the next big masterpiece. Madame Zara beamed at them. Now you're getting into the spirit of things. Remember, the key to a successful deception is in the details. Create a rich backstory for yourselves, and don't be afraid to improvise. As they prepared to leave, Connor hesitated. Wait, what about payment? Surely all of this must cost a fortune. Madame Zara waved her hand dismissively. Consider it a gift, my dears. All I ask is that you return tomorrow and tell me all about your adventures. That will be payment enough. With final adjustments made and a few last-minute tips from Madame Zara, Connor and Eloise, now Charlotte and Ethan, stepped out onto the street. The cool night air sent a shiver down Connor's exposed back, a sensation he wasn't used to. Ready for this? Eloise asked, offering her arm in a gentlemanly gesture. Connor took a deep breath, straightening his posture and adopting the confident air of his new persona. As ready as I'll ever be, darling.
he replied with a coy smile. They made their way to the Gala venue, a grand hotel known for hosting the city's most prestigious events. As they approached the entrance, Connor felt his heart racing. This was it, the moment of truth. The doorman, a distinguished older gentleman in a crisp uniform, greeted them with a polite nod. "Good evening, sir, madam. May I see your invitations?" Eloise, fully embracing her role as Ethan, reached into her jacket pocket with an air of nonchalance. "Of course, my good man. Here you are." The doorman examined the invitations, their original ones, thankfully unaltered by their costume change, and nodded approvingly. "Everything seems to be in order. Enjoy your evening, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood." As they passed through the grand doors into the opulent lobby, Connor leaned in close to Eloise. "Mr. and Mrs.? I thought we were supposed to be cousins." Eloise shrugged, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Well, Charlotte, I suppose we'll just have to adapt our story. After all, isn't that what Madame Zara said? Improvise?" The ballroom was a vision of elegance and luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the space, their light reflecting off the polished marble floors. Well-dressed attendees mingled, their quiet conversations creating a gentle hum that mixed with the soft strains of a string quartet playing in the corner. Connor felt a moment of panic as he realized just how many people were there, all of whom would be scrutinizing their appearance. But then he felt Eloise's reassuring hand on the small of his back, and he took a deep breath, channeling the confidence of his alter ego. Charlotte. "Shall we mingle, my dear?" Eloise asked in her deepened Ethan voice, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Connor nodded, adopting a coy smile.
"Lead the way, darling. You know how I love to make an entrance."
And make an entrance they did. As they moved through the crowd, heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence as people took in the sight of the striking couple. Connor could hear the whispers starting already. "Who are they? I don't recognize them. New money, perhaps? Did you see her gown? Simply stunning. And him! I must find out who his tailor is." A waiter approached with a tray of champagne flutes. Eloise smoothly plucked two from the tray, handing one to Connor with a flourish. "Your favorite, my dear," she said with a wink. Connor accepted the glass, making sure to extend his pinky as he took a delicate sip.
"You're too good to me, darling,"
he replied, pitching his voice slightly higher than usual. As they made their way deeper into the ballroom, Connor spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was his boss, Mr. Harrington, engaged in what appeared to be a rather dull conversation with one of the company's biggest clients. Eloise must have noticed too, because she leaned in close, whispering, "Shall we rescue poor Mr. Harrington from what looks like a terribly boring discussion?" Connor hesitated for a moment, then nodded. This would be the true test of their disguises. Taking a deep breath, he allowed Eloise to lead him towards the small group. "I couldn't help but overhear," Eloise interrupted smoothly, her voice rich and confident. "You were discussing the recent fluctuations in the Asian markets, were you not?" Mr. Harrington and his companion turned, surprise evident on their faces at the interruption. "Why, yes," Mr. Harrington replied, his eyes darting between Eloise and Connor with curiosity. "And you are?" "Ethan Blackwood," Eloise said, extending her hand for a firm handshake. "And this vision of loveliness beside me is my wife, Charlotte. We're visiting from London, distant relations of the host, you see." Connor dipped into a small curtsy, feeling both ridiculous and exhilarated. "Charmed, I'm sure," he said, affecting a slight British accent. Mr. Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly, but he quickly recovered his composure. "A pleasure
to meet you both. I'm afraid I don't recall the host mentioning any relatives from overseas. Oh, we're rather the black sheep of the family, I'm afraid, Connor interjected with a tinkling laugh. Always gallivanting about Europe, never settling in one place for too long. It makes keeping in touch such a bother.
The client, who had been quiet up until this point, seemed intrigued. And what is it that you do, Mr. Blackwood, that allows for such a nomadic lifestyle? Eloise didn't miss a beat. I'm an art dealer, specializing in emerging contemporary artists. Always on the hunt for the next big thing, you know. And Charlotte here, she said, gazing adoringly at Connor, is a fashion designer. Her avant-garde creations are all the rage in Paris and Milan. Connor felt a blush creeping up his cheeks, both from the attention and from the effort of maintaining their charade. He fanned himself delicately with his hand. Oh, darling, you flatter me. I simply follow my passion, that's all. Mr. Harrington was now looking at them with increased interest. Fashion and art. Two fields I must admit I know little about. Perhaps you could enlighten us. What are the current trends in your respective industries? For a moment, Connor felt a flutter of panic. He knew next to nothing about high fashion, let alone current trends. But then he remembered Madame Zara's advice. Confidence is key. Well, he began, adopting a haughty expression. If you must know.
The latest trend in haute couture is a return to the classics, but with a twist. Think Victorian silhouettes paired with space-age materials. Personally, I'm working on a line inspired by deep-sea creatures, all bioluminescent fabrics
and flowing tentacle-like appendages. He was talking complete nonsense, of course, but the others were nodding along, seemingly captivated by his passionate description. Eloise jumped in, seamlessly building on Connor's fabrication. Yes, and in the art world, we're seeing a fascinating convergence of traditional techniques and cutting-edge technology. I recently acquired a series of paintings created by an AI algorithm trained on Renaissance masterpieces. The results are, well, you simply must see them to believe it. Mr. Harrington's client leaned in, clearly intrigued. That sounds fascinating. I've always been interested in art, but never quite knew where to start. Perhaps you could recommend some up-and-coming artists for a novice collector like myself? As Eloise launched into a detailed explanation of fictional artists and their groundbreaking works, Connor caught Mr. Harrington staring at him with a puzzled expression. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought they'd been found out. But then Mr. Harrington simply shook his head and chuckled. You know, Mrs. Blackwood, you remind me of someone. One of my employees, actually. But of course that's impossible. The Connor I know wouldn't be caught dead in a dress, let alone pull it off so spectacularly. Connor felt a mix of relief and an odd sense of pride wash over him. Oh, this old thing, he said, running his hands down the sides of the gown. It's just a little something I threw together for the evening. But tell me more about this Connor fellow. He sounds like a rather dull sort if he can't appreciate the joys of a good frock now and then. Mr. Harrington laughed heartily. Oh, he's a good lad, don't get me wrong. Hard worker, sharp as a tack, but he's always been a bit straight-laced, if you know what I mean. Always playing it safe, never taking risks.
How terribly boring,
Connor replied, feeling a strange mix of defensiveness and amusement at hearing himself described this way. Perhaps what he needs is a little adventure to shake things up. Perhaps, Mr. Harrington agreed, a thoughtful look crossing his face. You know, I've been considering him for a promotion, but I've been hesitant. Wasn't sure if he had the, let's say, creative thinking needed for a higher position. But maybe I've been too hasty in my judgment. Connor's heart skipped a beat. A promotion? This was the first he'd heard of it. He opened his mouth to respond, but at that moment, the opening chords of a waltz filled the air. Eloise, ever the smooth operator, seized the opportunity. "Ah, darling," she said, turning to Connor with an outstretched hand. "Our song. Shall we?" Grateful for the escape, Connor placed his hand in Eloise's. "But of course, my love. If you'll excuse us, gentlemen." As Eloise led him to the dance floor, Connor leaned in close.
"That was close,"
he whispered. "I thought for sure Mr. Harrington had recognized me." "You handled it beautifully," Eloise reassured him. "Now, let's see if I remember how to lead in this dance." As they began to waltz, Connor found himself marveling at how different it felt to be led rather than leading. Eloise guided him confidently across the floor, their steps in perfect sync despite the role reversal. "You know," Connor mused as they twirled, "I never realized how freeing this could be. Playing a different role, I mean. It's like, for once, I don't have to worry about meeting anyone's expectations. I can just be whoever I want to be." Eloise smiled softly. "That's the magic of it, isn't it? Sometimes we need to step outside ourselves to see who we really are." She paused, then added with a chuckle, "Though I have to admit, these shoes are killing me. How do you ladies do it?" Connor laughed, the sound light and carefree.
"Practice, darling. Lots and lots of practice."
As the song came to an end, they found themselves face to face with another couple friends of theirs from college, Sarah and Mike. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her eyes wide with curiosity, "but I couldn't help noticing you two. You make such a striking couple. I don't believe we've met before. Are you friends of the host?" Eloise smoothly slipped back into her Ethan persona. "Distant relations, actually. Ethan Blackwood, and this is my wife, Charlotte. We're visiting from London." Mike's brow furrowed slightly. "Blackwood? I could have sworn the host's surname was different. Henderson, wasn't it?" Connor felt a moment of panic, but Eloise didn't miss a beat. "Ah, yes, well, it's a bit complicated. Family trees, you know how they are. Branches upon branches. We're from a rather obscure twig, shall we say?" Sarah nodded, though she still looked slightly confused. Of course. Well, it's lovely to meet you both. I must say, Mrs. Blackwood, your gown is absolutely stunning. Who's the designer?" Connor felt a thrill of excitement at the chance to embellish their story further. "Oh, this old thing?" he said with a coy smile. "I designed it myself, actually. I'm a fashion designer back in London, always using myself as a model for my more avant-garde creations." Sarah's eyes widened with interest. "Really? How fascinating! You know, you remind me so much of our friend Eloise. She's always had an eye for fashion. In fact, I could have sworn she was going to wear a gown very similar to yours tonight." Connor felt his heart rate quicken. This was getting dangerously close to home. "Is that so?" he managed, trying to keep his voice steady. "Well, you know what they say. Great minds think alike." Mike, who had been quiet up until now, suddenly squinted at Connor. "You know, now that Sarah mentions it, there is something familiar about you. Are you sure we haven't met before?" Eloise stepped in smoothly. "I very much doubt it, old chap. We've only just arrived in the country yesterday. Perhaps Charlotte simply has one of those faces, eh? Classically beautiful and all that." Connor felt a blush creep up his cheeks at the compliment, momentarily forgetting it was all part of the act. Sarah nodded, though she still looked slightly puzzled. "Yes, I suppose that must be it. It's just, there's something about your eyes. They're so much like our friend Connor's. You wouldn't happen to have any relatives here in the States, would you?" Connor felt a bead of sweat form on his brow. This was getting too close for comfort. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Sensing his distress, Eloise smoothly interjected, "I'm afraid not, my dear. Charlotte's family has been in England for generations. Proper blue bloods, don't you know? But I must say, these friends of yours sound absolutely charming. Perhaps we'll have the pleasure of meeting them later this evening?" Mike shook his head. "I'm not sure they'll be here, actually. We were supposed to meet up with them before the gala, but they never showed. It's not like them to be late." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Yes, it is rather odd. I do hope everything's all right. Connor's usually so punctual, and Eloise would never miss a chance to show off a new gown." Connor and Eloise exchanged a quick glance, both fighting to keep their expressions neutral. The irony of the situation was almost too much to bear. "Well," Eloise said, clearing her throat, "I'm sure they have a perfectly reasonable explanation. Perhaps they got caught up in some grand adventure on their way here. Life has a funny way of throwing unexpected twists our way, doesn't it?" Connor nodded emphatically, seizing on this opportunity to steer the conversation away from dangerous waters. "Oh, absolutely! Why, just the other day, Charlotte and I were on our way to a gallery opening in Paris when we stumbled upon the most extraordinary little shop." As Connor launched into an elaborate tale of their fictional Parisian misadventure, he could see Sarah and Mike's suspicions slowly melting away, replaced by genuine interest in their story. It was exhilarating, crafting this alternate reality on the fly, watching as others bought into their performance. For the next hour, Connor and Eloise floated through the gala, fully embracing their roles as Charlotte and Ethan. They charmed diplomats with tales of their jet-setting lifestyle, impressed art collectors with their completely fabricated knowledge of emerging artists, and even managed to secure a fictional order for Connor's next fashion line from a prominent socialite. As the evening wore on, Connor found himself feeling more and more comfortable in his new persona. The initial nervousness had given way to a sense of freedom he'd never experienced before. Here, as Charlotte, he could be bold, flirtatious, even a little outrageous. All things he'd never dared to be as Connor. Eloise, too, seemed to be reveling in her role as Ethan. Her natural charm was amplified by the confident swagger she'd adopted, and Connor couldn't help but admire how effortlessly she commanded attention in every conversation. They were in the middle of regaling a small group with the tale of their, entirely fictional, balloon ride over the Serengeti when Connor felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find himself face to face with the host of the gala, Mr. Henderson himself.
"I beg your pardon,"
Mr. Henderson said, his brow furrowed in confusion.
"but I couldn't help overhearing. You said you were relatives of mine?"
Connor felt his heart drop into his stomach. This was it, the moment their elaborate charade would come crashing down around them. He opened his mouth, desperately trying to think of a way out of this predicament, when Eloise stepped in. "Ah, Cousin Robert!" she exclaimed, pulling Mr. Henderson into a bear hug before he could react. "How wonderful to finally meet you in person. I'm Ethan Blackwood, and this vision of loveliness is my wife, Charlotte. We're from the English branch of the family. You know, Great Aunt Millicent's side." Mr. Henderson looked utterly baffled. "Great Aunt Millicent? I'm not sure I—"
"Oh, don't tell me you've forgotten about dear Millie," Connor chimed in, adopting a look of mock horror. "Why, she was the talk of London society back in her day. Caused quite the scandal when she ran off with that dashing young earl. Or was it a duke? The details get so muddled over time, don't they, darling?" Eloise nodded sagely. "Indeed they do, my love. But family is family, no matter how tangled the branches of the tree may become. Isn't that right, Cousin Robert?" Mr. Henderson, clearly overwhelmed by this onslaught of information, simply nodded weakly. Yes, of course. Family. How wonderful that you could join us this evening. If you'll excuse me, I think I need to have a word with my wife. Perhaps she can shed some light on this unexpected family reunion.
As Mr. Henderson hurried away, looking thoroughly confused, Connor and Eloise exchanged a triumphant glance. They'd managed to bluff their way through yet another close call.
I can't believe we pulled that off,
Connor whispered, his heart still racing from the encounter. Eloise grinned, a mischievous glint in her eye. Never underestimate the power of confidence and
a good story, my dear. Now, shall we make our grand exit before Cousin Robert returns with reinforcements?
Connor nodded, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment that their evening of adventure was coming to an end.
Lead the way, darling.
I believe it's time for Charlotte and Ethan to bid farewell to high society. As they made their way towards the exit, Connor couldn't help but reflect on the night's events. He'd stepped so far out of his comfort zone, and yet it had been exhilarating. For one magical evening, he'd been someone else entirely. Someone bold, someone confident, someone who didn't worry about fitting in or meeting others' expectations. Eloise must have sensed his thoughts because she squeezed his hand gently. You were amazing tonight, you know that? I've never seen you so free. Connor smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. It was all thanks to you, Elle. I never would have had the courage to do this on my own. As they stepped out into the cool night air, leaving behind the glittering world of the Gala, Connor realized something profound. The person he'd been tonight, the confident, adventurous spirit behind Charlotte's glamorous facade, that person had been inside him all along. It had just taken a crazy costume swap and a night of role-playing to bring it out.
You know,
he said as they walked hand in hand down the quiet street, I think Connor might be ready for that promotion after all. Eloise grinned, pulling him close. I have no doubt about that. But first, what do you say we head back to Madame Zara's? I think we have quite the story to tell her. And so, still dressed in their swapped finery, Connor and Eloise made their way back through the city streets, eager to share their adventure with the eccentric shopkeeper who had set it all in motion. The night was still young, and who knew what other surprises it might hold for this unconventional couple.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!